Howdy folks, it's old Texas Paul here. Hope your coffee's as good as mine. Why don't you take a look at this video? Old Marjorie Taylor Greene is at it again.
On the bill for this domestic terrorism new bill that came out for the Department of Justice. And Jerry Nadler was on the House floor and he was talking about white supremacy, and he was bringing up the terrible shooting that happened in New York, but totally ignoring the shooting that happened in California that I think involved an Asian man that was the shooter, totally ignoring the guy that drove his car, black man that drove his car through a Christmas parade, killing people and was a racist himself, completely ignoring the black man that did the New York subway shooting. You know, these people are all guilty of these crimes, and it's not about race. It shouldn't be about race, but they're clearly racist as well. So white supremacy shouldn't be the main target. We should be more concerned about the illegal invasion at the border, the crime happening every single day on our streets, and especially in cities like Chicago. We should go after criminals that break the law and not pursue people based on their skin color and how they vote. But that's what the Democrats want to do.
As you can see, you've got old Marjorie Taylor Greene there just complaining about this new domestic terrorism bill. Their major complaints that they've made publicly are that the bill will allow the federal government to target parents at school board meetings, and that it will divert resources needed by law enforcement, basically waste it investigating the infiltration of white supremacy into the armed services and police forces. The problem with that is the domestic terrorism bill has specific language in it that protects free speech. So if you want to go down to your local school board meeting, that's fine. Say what you want. Free speech is protected. Where it scares the Republicans is if you're a national group that is recruiting people to go into these school board meetings, or recruiting people to send threats to school board members, well, that's not protected speech, that's terrorism, and they don't want that looked at. Because folks, there's a reason that every one of these school board meetings that you see the clips of, these people are repeating the same talking points over and over and over again. It's not because they saw it on Fox News. It's because you've got these online communication services like Telegraph and whatnot, where these people recruit and send messages back and forth, and they find local radicals to go into these school boards, and they tell them exactly what to say and what to do. And they don't want law enforcement looking at this. What the domestic terrorism bill does, people, and we have to get this passed. It's passed the House, it's sitting in the Senate. You need to be calling your senator and making sure that we get enough Democrats that this bill passes. Because what this bill does is, and it doesn't just look at white supremacy or white terrorism, domestic terrorism. It looks at domestic terrorism overall, and it tracks it. It forms groups within the DOJ, the FBI, and Homeland Security to specifically look at the infiltration of the armed services and police forces by domestic terrorists. Whether they're white terrorists, black terrorists, whatever their motivation is. It looks at the infiltration and recruitment from those groups. But more importantly, what it does is it forces them to report annually to Congress, which means this will be documented. There will be a database for this information for the first time. A lot of people don't realize that right now there is no database for law enforcement to use on domestic terrorism. The Joint Terrorism Task Force was formed, and it was the first communication between federal law enforcement and locals and whatnot that was ever created to deal with terrorism, and on the heels of 9/11 and all the attacks that we had around the country. Even after the Oklahoma City bombing, there was no communication between our federal law enforcement. And a lot of people, including the terrorists, have a misconception about what law enforcement can do in this country. And they have no idea how much they're hamstrung. You could commit a hate-based crime in Florida. Then you could travel to Texas and commit the same crime, the same exact way. Leave the same swastikas or whatever, the exact same crime. Then travel to California, then travel to Oregon. And unless one of those crimes was solved locally, and that person confessed to being part of a group, law enforcement would have no idea that these crimes were ever related, because there is no database to log this kind of crime. There's no resource. A real problem for the police right now is when you have these radical groups, they're so paranoid because they do so much wrong that they have multiple engagements with law enforcement. And they think, okay, the IRS is coming out and talked to me, and that guy showed me a badge. The local police came out when we were shooting, and the neighbor called the police because, we were shooting and it was landing on his property. Or we had a big old party and there was a noise violation, and another cop came out. And then they make a threat online, and then a federal agent shows up and shows them a badge. Well, they think that all of these people are talking to each other, and they start getting real paranoid. They think they're tracked. They have no idea, people, no idea that nobody is tracking them. Nobody. And that's why it's so important for this bill to be passed. Why do Republicans hate it so much? Well, I'll tell you. Republicans can't win elections without white supremacists. Republicans can't win elections without Christian nationalists. And I have to, to paraphrase the great American treasure, Maya Angelou, when people tell you who they are, believe them. We have Marjorie Taylor Greene that you just saw. But we've also got Paul Gosar, who's constantly going on hunting trips and trips down to Arizona and whatnot with white supremacist bloggers. And you've got Steve King that was finally defeated from Iowa, who was just overtly racist and hanging out with these groups. You've got Wendy Rogers down in Arizona, who is trying to give cover for the Buffalo shooter by claiming it was a false flag operation and that the shooter may have actually been a federal agent just trying to get at these white supremacist groups. Why are Republicans so paranoid about police getting at these white supremacist organizations? Well, it falls down to the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And crossover inbreeding within what I call the pyramid of Satan. You have on one side the Republicans who cannot win elections without these people. So they court and cater to them constantly, protect them, like trying to keep this bill from passing. Then you have the Christian nationalists with guys like Tony Perkins and his Family Research Council. They have their group called the Watchmen. It's a nationwide organization that recruits pastors to be more like guys like Greg Locke. Don't just sit on the sidelines and teach Jesus. We want you to enforce Jesus. They don't want traditional Jesus. They want GOP Jesus. They want Christian nationalism. And they recruit pastors to do that very thing within their own cities. And then on the far right side, you have the hate groups. You've got groups like the KKK, which has been in decline and fracturing for years, has recently seen a resurgence. And I'll tell you folks, you need to pay attention to what I tell you right here. This hits home to you. What I'm about to tell you applies to you, not just me. My little hometown here, my little beautiful neck of the woods, while I was researching this article, I found out there was an offshoot of the KKK. One of the splinter groups is headquartered here in my little town. They were doxxed by an organization that calls themselves Jewish Antifa. They just outed them. They penetrated their servers, got their name, addresses, and they doxed them. When the police were interviewed about it, they said there was no Klan activity in our little town. Now, I'm not saying that's nefarious. They may just be that clueless about it. They may not know that they've got a splinter hate group formed in our little town because nobody's talking. Or it could be the same situation that we're seeing with so many of these groups, that they're specifically recruiting out of police departments and former military. A really scary example is Major Jeff Poole. He was in the training regiment at Fort Benning. That should scare you. For years, he was an out, open, avid white supremacist. He didn't hide it. He was never caught by the Army. It was a group of veterans, when he started spreading his viral hate on Reddit, that put together a PowerPoint presentation of all things and took it to Army CID and said, look at what you have here in this training regiment, training our soldiers. That's when the Army acted against him. I mean, that should scare you. Not some Lance Corporal somewhere that was radicalized. I'm talking about, this is a major. And it took them a long time to get him out of the Army. It really did. You know, folks, I can't stress to you how much this needs to be our 911. Just below voting in the midterms in importance is getting this domestic terrorism bill passed. You know, you have these hate groups, you know, like the KKK I mentioned. There's another one called Adam Waffen. They were more tried to hide their identities. Folks, several of them were arrested with explosives after a plan was discovered to blow up a nuclear plant. And they were charged with explosives. But it's not tracked. It's not tracked. If people that were in this investigation, you know, caught up in this investigation, move to another state or another part of the country, there's no communication. The local law enforcement there will have no idea. The local field office will have no idea. If it's another federal agency, they'll have no idea. That's why we need this legislation passed so badly. And it's getting worse, folks. You got groups like the Boogaloo Boys, which started out as an anarchy organization that was mixed race, is getting permeated more and more by white supremacists. You got groups like the Proud Boys out there that are just married to the GOP, that are dying for a civil war. These groups were all showing up on January 6th. You have to really, really understand how big a problem this is. Your local church is where these people go. You know, and I'm not attacking Christians. I'd love somebody that goes out and preaches traditional Jesus. This GOP Jesus is the one that I think may actually be Satan. These groups, because they all have the same anti-Islam, anti-Democrat, anti-immigrants, anything but white male dominated Christianity and a national Christian theocracy, these groups are married together in a cause. And they can't survive without each other. Kick one leg out and they all collapse. You know, the GOP doesn't want you finding out that these churches are preaching their doctrine. They don't want you finding out that these churches are preaching to the radicals. The radicals don't want you to find out that they're in the churches. The radicals, the white supremacists, don't want you to find out that they're in the police forces. The radicals don't want you to find out that they're in the military. And folks, so far, they've been able to do it. And that's why the GOP, which would normally be, hey, let's crack down on terrorism, has taken a look at the domestic terrorism bill and said, whoa, no, these are going after our people. Because to date, they've been able to take people like the Buffalo shooter and say he has mental illness. Mental illness. No. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't crazy. He's evil. He's awful. But he wasn't crazy. He achieved his objective. He did what he wanted to do. He was of clear mind when he went in and he killed these people. It was his mission, and he achieved his mission. Folks, they don't want that looked at because he wasn't alone. And if law enforcement, good cops can have this information and they have to document it, put it in a database, report to Congress every year, not just on Islamic terrorism. That was the problem with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, is it focused on foreign terrorism and what happened in 9/11 with it coming out of the country. This forces them to look at domestic terrorism, no matter what race, they have to look at it. And they are forced by statute here to include these acts of terrorism, like the Buffalo shooter, in their report. And that's where the GOP says, whoa, you can't do that. I need them. I need them to stay in power. Think how often Trump refused to condemn these groups. Think how often Trump courted these groups, told them to stand back and stand by.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Folks, this is a 911 call. Old Texas Paul here, telling you, this is a fight we have to have, and I need you on the phone. I need you calling your senators right now. Drop what you're doing right now. Call your senators and tell them this bill has to pass. If it fails in the first vote, we need to make sure Chuck Schumer brings it up again immediately, and we go after every senator, every single senator, until this bill gets passed. I love you folks. We've got a big problem on our hands. I'm looking forward to fighting it with you. Old Texas Paul out.